Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue dans cette édition spéciale de ResiliArt, un débat qui intervient alors que l'UNESCO participe à la célébration de 2020.
Welcome all to this special edition of ResiliArt, a debate which is part of UNESCO celebrating of the International Year of the Creative Economy for Sustainable Development as declared by the United Nations in 2021. This is the theme of our discussion is going to be Build Back Better through Creative Economy, and we have with us Jean Michel Jarre, who is a highly connected composer, one of the most famous French musicians in the world and a reference in electronic music. You had an unforgettable hit called Oxygen. You have always been a pioneer in the 1980s with your semicircular synthesizer with light keys and the laser harp you had in, and then early 2021 with Welcome to the Other Side, a virtual concert in Notre Dame in Paris, which was followed by over 75 million spectators in the world. You've sold more than 85 million records throughout the world, and you've given spectacular concerts everywhere from Moscow to Shanghai, and even in the Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy. And now you are a source of interesting thoughts about new technologies and their consequences on our humanity as such. We are also going to be graced with the presence of Abderrahmane Sissako, who is a filmmaker and producer. Bamako, Timbuktu, Life on Earth, and Rostov, Luanda. Africa is more than your cradle. It is also your muse. It seems to be at the spring of your cinema. It's political, it's poetic as well. And film viewers were struck with emotion, particularly when they saw your masterpiece in 2014, Timbuktu, which was rewarded by several French Césars, Best Film and Best Director, but was also nominated at Cannes and at the Oscars. And recently, you also directed theatre at the Théâtre du Châtelet with a contemporary opera called The Theft of the Boli. Vanja Kaludjercic is our third guest. She is the director of the International Film Festival of Rotterdam, IFFR, which is being held this very week, February 1st through 7th, online, of course, because of the pandemic. Vanja, you've traveled very far in the film industry, both internationally and in Holland. You've particularly worked for a video-on-demand site called Mubi, where you were in charge of purchasing, but you've been involved in a lot of different film festivals, such as the Berlinale, the Sarajevo Film Festival, and also the Film Festival of Les Arcs. We also have with us Thomas Steffens, who is the director and chairperson of Primephonic. This is a specialized music streaming service which does classical music. Thomas Steffens is a classical music lover, and he explained to us that this platform was needed because the popular platforms such as Spotify of Deezer were leaving the space open as they never streamed classical music, but only pop music. But Steffens is also a member of the Dutch Council for the Arts, which is an advisory board to the Dutch government concerning all issues that have to do with the arts and culture. Finally, we have Victoria Contreras, who is the founder and director general of Conecta Cultura in Mexico, an international reference of cultural management. You have managed social innovation projects and promoted culture and development in Latin America, and have 15 years experience in managing international cultural and social projects, particularly connecting the Americas and Europe. So this panel is very representative of diversity in culture, and I thank you all for being with us. I want to start with giving the floor to Ernesto Ottone, who is our Assistant Director-General for Culture here at UNESCO. I see great friends here, Jean Michel Jarre, who is one of UNESCO's Ambassadors of Goodwill. I also want to thank Vanja, Thomas, and Abderrahmane and Victoria for being with us today.
Creative economy for sustainable development. Over the past year, as we have faced the enormous global challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all learned the importance of international solidarity and cooperation. No country, no region, and no sector from tourists to trade to education, has been left untouched by COVID-19, and this includes culture sector. From the very beginning of this crisis, people everywhere have turned to culture as a source of connection, entertainment, and hope. Yet, despite its importance, culture has largely been forgotten in COVID-19 recovery efforts around the world. As artists and cultural professionals continue to lose their livelihoods, facing acute economic and social insecurity, now is the time to come together to discuss and find safe ways of reopening cultural venues and resuming artistic creation. We must be united to find solutions to have the artists and cultural professionals who have helped us immeasurably during this time. Just this week, Italy is reopening its cultural sites. I hope that many other countries will soon find ways to follow suit. In April last year, UNESCO launched a global movement, ResiliArt. That's a platform for artists and cultural professionals to come together and express their concerns, hopes, and solutions in the face of this crisis. To date, over 240 debates have been organized in more than 110 countries all over the world. UNESCO continues to fulfill its promise to all those who have participated in ResiliArt debates to share their ideas and concerns with member states and policymakers. Just this week, the preliminary results of the global ResiliArt movement were discussed by the Intergovernmental Committee of UNESCO 2005 Convention on the protection and promotion of the diversity of cultural expression. Nous avons également constaté l'impact.
We have also seen the direct impact of ResiliArt as a movement in the field. Uganda was the first country to join ResiliArt. It organized its first debate, ResiliArt, on the very morn of the launching of the movement. And they took this mission to heart, managed to bring together many artists and professionals around 6 discussions, and they put special emphasis on the film sector, using those film actors who had been mobilized by the technical assistance project run with Uganda by the European Union and UNESCO. And the direct consequence of these discussions and of the needs expressed during this discussion by Uganda's cultural workers is that Uganda created an online platform for Uganda's filmmakers to make their films available for free, which makes the public have easier access to Ugandan films. And the cost of the data necessary to operate this platform is subsidized in return for the artists need to access affordable data, and the platform gives the government help in return. It gives the government useful information about the film consumption habits of Uganda. And Uganda's example is a good example of cooperation and of ways to act. We are all involved in defending cultural expression, which is essential to the world, whereas huge platforms and producers are dominating the creation and the dissemination of cultural content. It is up to us to safeguard the diversity of cultural expressions, and it is up to us to protect independent artists, emergent and young artists, and women artists. The year 2021 is the International Year of the Creative Economy at the Service of Sustainable Development, and UNESCO has joined a UN UNCTAD for the implementation of this International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development, organizing a number of activities to shed light on the power of creativity. On February 1st, UNESCO launched this celebration with messages from the United Nations General Assembly and representatives of multilateral agencies and the President of Colombia. The year 2021 must be a year of action. We must build back better, together with the creative economy, and develop new partnerships for the creative sectors of tomorrow. And we must make sure that those who work at each step of the creative value chain, from creation, production, and distribution to access, are all represented. And the organizations of civil society may fill the gaps and make sure that representation is even stronger. As Naomi Kawase was saying only 2 days ago, during a ResiliArt debate, after the plague, the Renaissance bloomed. We must do our very best to make sure that the enormous challenges we face today are all rewarded in the end by unlimited creativity. And who better than today's panelists, who all represent various sectors of the cultural industries, who is better placed to explore the possibility of building back better with the creative economy? I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope that your exchanges will be fruitful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ernesto, for having given us this, for these essential messages. Yes, we need to build back better with the creative economy and use the creative economy for a sustainable development. And we must make sure, as you just said, make sure that each worker in the creative chain, including production, distribution, and access, that they should all be represented. We have to find solutions for them all and save those artists who have been saving us ever since the beginning of the pandemic, bringing us that oxygen, that fresh air that we all needed so very much, particularly during lockdowns. So here we all are today to act together. We need to find concrete actions, concrete solutions, and that's what we're going to discuss with our panelists, the ones I just introduced earlier. How to build back better in a creative and sustainable way. Let me start with you, Jean Michel Jarre. You are an artist and a famous one. But recently you have been working hard for younger creators, for emerging artists. Are you calling for the creation of a new business model for the cultural sector? Can you remind us what the main issues are that we need to solve? Jean Michel Jarre, I think your microphone is not on. Oh, sorry. That's precisely what a guy like me should not be doing. Well, hi everybody. Hi Ernesto. Hi Abderrahmane. I want to thank all my friends for being here today. Yes, here we are together trying to make things change. And as you were saying, to respect cultural diversity, I'm going to speak French as well as English. After all, French is my mother tongue, so I'll start with French. And it is my privilege today, as you were saying, to be able to live off my work. I've been doing so for many years, since the beginning of my career. So if I'm concerned right now, if I'm worried, it's not so much for myself as for future generations, all these generations of artists who are facing basically a disastrous situation. In this sector, and the governments should be reminded of it, all those governments who may be listening to us right now, please note that the cultural sector is not just a niche sector. It makes a bigger difference to the economy than the car industry or the luxury industry. The creative industries account for 7 million jobs in Europe, 2 million jobs only in music. And 30% of these jobs are currently imperiled. And if we don't do anything, that's a part not just of our economy, but of our identity as world citizens that's going to disappear. So during the lockdown, what have we been doing? We've been doing two things, right? We went out to get food, and we listened to music, watched movies, read books. That's all we could do. In order to prove to ourselves, if you will, that there is no doubt that music, culture, cinema, books are essential goods, necessary goods. I'm here on this screen and not on the streets of Paris today to demonstrate with my fellow artists, because I want to remind you that theaters, cinemas, concert venues are as essential as the post office or any shop in town. And why is it so important to start with saying that? Because we need to draw the government's attention to the fact that culture today more than ever is the Trojan horse of the future Renaissance. We need it.
Lose their job. The British government few days ago said to the artist officially that if you can survive with your art, find another job. All this shows that urgently we have to change of paradigm, and we have lots of possibilities to do that. First of all, through UNESCO, to send clear message of one voice, because you know, I'm living in France. French people are very popular to complain about everything, but it's even much worse in lots of other countries where the government is much more absent than in my home country. And I think that we have to, and I think that will be one of the purpose of this panel, and then I will pass the floor to my colleagues, just to say that first of all we have also to ask ourselves if we want to save the culture as citizens of the planet. It's not only to the governments we have to address this message, it's to ourselves. I mean, we as citizens of the planet, we are part of our identity, part of our human rights. I mean, is the cultural aspect of our day-to-day life. In every family, we have a child dreaming, becoming a photographer, a filmmaker, a musician, a writer. If we don't take care of this, all these kids, they are going to work at Uber in the next few years. This is exactly what it is. And then we have also another thought to and another plan to organize is to organize ourselves regarding the GAFA, and I think that we will have some time to talk about this later on. There is a real strategy to have all together to think about all these giants of the internet, stopping maybe whining and considering them our enemies, but as potential partners. And I would be happy to develop this a bit later in the panel, but I will leave the floor to my colleagues, of course.
Thank you, Jean Michel Jarre. And yes, we'll talk about that again. On reparlera.
Indeed, we will discuss the role of the GAFA a little later during this discussion. Abderrahmane Sissako, can you tell us what challenges you are meeting these days, as well as other professionals in the performing arts and in cinema? You organized a contemporary opera called Le Vol du Bolide, which was played on the stage of the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris in October. Now, originally, this was supposed to be shown for 3 weeks. And then, because lockdown struck again, there were only 3 performances, which were all sold out, which demonstrates that people miss it. People miss the theater. Now, how did that feel for you?
Comme moi.
Ah bon?
Microphone, please. Yes, it's working now. Hi. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, indeed, we can. So, I just said hi. Thank you very much, Jean Michel, for your introduction. You said briefly, but very accurately, that the concerns of any artist today in Europe or in Africa, well, you stated those concerns. So let me just start by saying that I feel I'm lucky compared to tens of thousands of artists in Africa, musicians, movie directors, who for a year already have been in dire circumstances. You know that in Africa, we don't have any policies or government agencies that support the artist's role in society. We don't make much money. We are in the informal economy, as it were. And when such a tragedy as this one hits, well, you can easily imagine the consequences for creativity on artists. When an artist has to stay silent, and I'm talking about a musician, or when an artist can no longer work, paint, dance, you know, they have to stop moving, well, I think that makes humankind all the poorer. And so I'm in a very lucky position, but I have to say that this was also thanks to the huge help given to me by the Théâtre du Châtelet. It was preparations lasted at least 2 years. It took a lot of people working a lot on this project, and we were lucky enough to be able to have 3 shows, to put 3 shows on. So quite a few people got to see the show. And so I think in this situation, we have a unique opportunity to alert public authorities and everyone else to really highlight how vulnerable the human species is, you know, how fragile we are. I think the past year has completely shown that. You know, sometimes we have been too reckless, perhaps, unthinking in how we just treat the environment, for example. The, rich people are becoming even richer, even in this pandemic, and the other part of the world, more than half, is getting poorer. So we are at a unique juncture where we have to rethink, balance in the world. We need more sharing. Our world is very rich, wealthy, and all those riches are very unequally shared. Thank you very much, Abderrahmane Sissako. It is true what you say. In many areas of the world, culture is considered as a luxury, not necessarily as a basic human right.
Thank you, Vanja Kaludjercic. As I was saying, you're hosting this week your film festival, the Rotterdam Film Festival, which is also celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. You've come up with a unique way of holding this event. Can you share with us what has changed and how you have managed to adapt to the restrictions due to the pandemic? How have you reinvented the festival?
Yeah, thanks first and foremost for having me. It's an honor to be in this group. And indeed, so the 50th edition of our festival, the IFFR, is currently in full swing. And the shape of it, as you said in the question already, it's very different from what we're used to here in Rotterdam. So with already first wave of lockdowns, which was happening early in March, it's now almost a year ago, it became very clear for us from a very early stage that this global health crisis will prevent us from planning the festival or carrying it out in the way we know it and we are used to it. And we are talking about a festival that is gathering over 300,000 visitors. So this is why very early on with the entire team, we started preparing for different scenarios and developing contingency plans, and all of this with keeping in mind that measures and restrictions by the government could be changed at any given moment, which of course over the time happened many times because of course also the circumstances have changed quite clear. And what became very clearly quite clear from early on is that we would not be able to cater to all of our stakeholders and communities at the same time. And by that, we mean the community of filmmakers, the audience, the partners, and of course, other stakeholders that we as a festival serve towards. So what we have come up with in the end is that we have divided our festival in a multi-part hybrid event spanning from February all the way till June. And currently we are having the first part of the festival in the full swing.
Thank you, Vanja. And may I just briefly ask you, did you manage to share a bit of the usual festival vibe? Do you already have an idea of the figures? Was the audience there?
Well, I can definitely say that the opening night was better than ever. We had an audience outreach that now counts in several thousands, which of course, even if you fit all this audience in a couple of cinemas, we wouldn't be able to achieve these numbers. So what we can see is that there is a different outreach, that it's all of a sudden more democratic, of course, on the level of Netherlands, for instance. And because we also noticed that our audiences adapt as well. So it's not only the culture in our industry that had adapted, but audience that is currently deprived from accessing everything else physically also took this challenge upon themselves. So we can see really how our film lovers are so passionately participating in all of the activities, because after each screening of the competition titles that we currently have, we can see filmmakers interacting with the audience directly, and these debates are quite amazing. So the reactions are immediate. We can see that for sure.
Thank you, Vanja. Thomas Steffens from Primephonic. Since the first lockdown measures appeared around the globe, streaming services have seen an important increase of their subscribers. Is that the case for you? And if so, by how much? How has the pandemic changed your platform?
Yeah, quite a bit. Indeed, well, I say this with a kind of a bittersweet feeling, in that I know that most people employed in the arts are having very hard and dire times. Indeed, we see in the streaming environment, whether that's video or audio, actually a strong increase in listenership. So I think in our case, I think the number of users has increased by more than 50%, but we also see that people are listening more minutes per day. So not only more people are streaming, but also more people per day. More minutes per day are being streamed per person. And there's two interesting things to add to that. The first is we see actually more older people streaming now. So people who in the past did not really feel, let's say, connected to the digital world. And now, let's say, with all the venues closed, they are pretty much forced to embrace, let's say, the digital opportunities that nowadays exist. So we see more older users coming in. And we see more younger users coming in, because younger people now often have more time that they can't go to the gym or to their friends anymore. We see now that they're doing more trainings and stuff. So we also have an online beginner course in classical music, where we see that younger people are checking in. And the third thing we see is that people are taking more time to explore music they didn't know yet. So pre-corona, most of our users were listening to the same music all the time. And now we see that people are taking the time to explore new composers, music from countries that typically would not listen to. And that brings me to my final point, which is, yes, I understand many people are facing very dire challenges at the moment, but I'm optimistic about the years thereafter. Because I think that the lockdowns show to people in my country and in many countries, I mean, a lockdown is hard, but a lockdown without music, without books, without TV series and films would be much harder. So I think there is an increasing awareness on the important role that the arts play in our daily lives that perhaps in the past was overlooked. And second, I think we see that there is now more momentum for digital distribution of the arts, which can allow for more discovery and also for a broader access of people who in the past were not consuming the culture. So I think there is momentum now that if we can tap it, actually the cultural sector can get stronger out of COVID than it was before. But first, we have to survive in the coming months, of course.
Thank you, Thomas Steffens. Victoria Contreras, you're a member of a civil society organization. What are these issues and challenges you've witnessed? How have you addressed them? And perhaps since we've heard viewpoints from Europe and Africa, have you seen some differences in your region?
Yes, thank you, Valerie. I'm so glad to be here with this group because I am a Mexican and also a Latin American person. And I think many of the audiences want to be in this kind of debate. Well, for Conecta, Cultura and me in 2020, the biggest problem was the cancellation of our projects and contract. I mean, like around 85%. Like many civil society organizations, we face mobility restrictions for face-to-face work, and there have been no public actions clearly aimed at supporting the cultural sector during the pandemic. So Conecta Cultura, what did? Write, reconnect, start doing, and communicate better. So we create a kind of a new narrative and engagement plan with our allies and audiences in Latin America, principally. For example, new digital communication channels, because in the past we only work in the territories and in a presential work. New online courses and sale of some souvenirs. We invested also with our own budget in the payment of online platforms, graphic design, and digital market. That's it. we also reduce our team to a minimum. So now, for the better, I think in the pandemic, 90% of our projects are digital. About your question about similarities, we feel in Mexico and Latin America more similarities with Africa. In general, Latin America and Africa are very similar, pretty similar in terms of the high level of creativity of its communities and entrepreneurs. But we have to improve our professional capabilities. And we have little support from the public policies for culture and art. So the creativity, it's so important, but also the persons who works in the arts and culture have to improve their capacity buildings to be much more ready to face these challenges during the pandemic.
Gracias, Victoria Contreras. Merci. Comme vous l'avez tous rappelé, ces derniers mois nous ont bien...
Very much. Now, as you have all said, these past few months have demonstrated that arts and culture play a crucial role in our lives. And we all agree on that. But we need to do more to convince, to advocate to public authorities, and also to get civil society to understand that artists can help with economic recovery. How can we get artists and creators to be seen as economic actors? Vanja, how do you think that we can get more recognition for example, the film industry? How can it contribute to recovery?
Evident how much culture is instrumental for the well-being of citizens in general, I must say, to begin. From books to gaming and movies, culture has stepped up and adapted. So I think it's very important to say that. And in the same way, the cinema industry has been incredibly resilient and creative. It completely transformed and adapted to satisfy the audience expectations as well. And we ourselves as a festival are witness to that. And cinema theaters transformed their screening rooms and lobbies to welcome audiences safely until they were asked to shut down completely. And on the other hand, distributors worked with online platforms and festivals, and us as a festival worked with funders and local and national institutional funders as well, where government, on the other hand, have adapted their budget accordingly. And IFFR, for instance, is adapting to national and EU regulations as well. In the Netherlands, measures were adopted to protect labor. However, it is a very bottom-up approach that doesn't necessarily respond to any of the sector projections and the experience we have acquired in the last 9 months. So supporting the freelancers and precarious workers involved in the cinema industry environment would be a lot more helpful. Even in pandemic situation, IFFR generates 130 jobs, give or take, which is roughly half of the professionals usually involved in the preparation and running of a regular edition. And those are the people who actually now need support more than ever. The speed and lack of coordination has been quite detrimental to the key players in the sector. The long-term economic value of the cultural sector needs recognizing, because 9 months of pandemic experience has not necessarily helped policymakers to reflect and prioritize. So speaking from a European perspective and having myself worked in the industry here through the last economic crisis, I have to say that I think we've already seen some disturbing signals of what's to come if we as a community are not proactive and vocal.
Thank you, merci. Abderrahmane.
Thank you. Abderrahmane Sissako, how can movie industry professionals adapt to the post-COVID world? You have portrayed several poignant stories from Africa and brought that to the large screen. You have Africa is made up of a number of distinct countries, but the status of art is not always recognized by governments. It's more often than not an informal sector. What can be done to change things? Abderrahmane, microphone, please. Yes, you have to unmute your mic every time. I hope you can hear me now. Yes, we certainly can. Well, I was saying that it's a positive thing to underscore the situation of artists in Africa, which was difficult, challenging even before the pandemic. It has not really been acknowledged that we contribute to the economy of countries. And obviously, there's going to be an end to this pandemic. We have to be optimistic. That's the way the world goes. We are going to get ourselves out of this. But the first thing we need to realize is that it's very important to realize that we, in particular, the film industry, is going to make a contribution. But you have dancers, musicians, all of us, all artists. We are going to make a contribution that has yet to be reckoned, calculated. We all need music and reading, etc. We have all been affected. How are we going to get out of this rut? Well, that's what art is there for. It's to soothe the soul, to help rebuild as well. Therefore, governments, I think, need to be able to put figures on the contribution of artists, in particular in building back. Thank you very much, Abderrahmane. Victoria Contreras, can you tell us how the projects that you invest in contribute to the economic development of Mexico City with a positive social impact as well? Victoria, your microphone, please.
Sorry. Well, first of all, we do a circular economy with various allies and collaborators in Latin America, not only in Mexico City, because our impact in this moment it's in the all Latin America. So our impact is a local and a regional level. We strengthen cultural management capacities in a contemporary and critical way. This is pretty important for us because the pandemic exiges that people think critically about our sector for the solution of problems. We connect with diverse audiences and decision makers, not only in Mexico, but I said in Latin America, in a network of flexible collaborations. I think also we inspire people from Latin America to take an active role in cultural arts. And I want to say this, that culture is a part of the global solution, it's not a problem. In Spanish, I want to say also that la cultura no es un problema, es parte de la solución. And also, we decided to write some critical texts that analyze the current cultural policies in Mexico principally. And another positive impact is that we get more than 14,000 beneficiaries in the digital arena. This will be very difficult in the previously of the pandemic. So in general, this is our impact during the pandemic.
Thank you, Victoria. Merci, Victoria. Jean Michel Jarre, de quelle façon?
Thank you, Victoria. What about you, Jean Michel Jarre? What do you think the musical sector can do to help healing in the economic sectors all over the world? Well, firstly, I want to point out that UNESCO has a very important role to play. And through this ResiliArt initiative, UNESCO can do a lot. Because what exactly does ResiliArt stand for? It means that for all artists and not just musicians, it means resisting. Resilience means that we know that we're all faced with the same problem, whichever sector we happen to be performing art in. And we are all looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, survival between now and then, and whether we are artists or not, we also have something in common, which is a very important thing. Being aware that culture is, in fact, not an obstacle, it's the solution. Resilience is one thing and resistance is another. Artists have always stood for freedom of thinking, freedom of expression. That's the whole reason why dictatorships are very suspicious of art. And artists tend to be the first to react in the face of inequity. I think that governments must understand that giving social support to musicians and artists in general, and it's also important that we ourselves, artists, should make sure that we nurse our own capacity to pick up where we left off.
Lots of new technology. Lots of people are complaining about new technology, the fact that we are in a virtual world and so on and so forth, and and we want to go back to the real world. Of course, I want to go back to a real stage to play my music. Of course, I want to be in touch with musicians. But also, what we have learned during this period is the fact that the internet, online, being able to connect like we are connecting right now, which would be maybe even more difficult in the real world today. Being able to connect not only information but also emotions. And then why I'm saying this is actually I think there is new mode of expressions which could emerge from the pandemic linked to new technology. The fact that for instance, and we should not be afraid of this. At the beginning of the cinema and movies, at the time of Les Frères Lumière, when movies were projected in circus on white walls, lots of people from the world of theater were saying, but these guys moving on the white wall are not real actors. A real actor is the artist being on a real stage in front of a real audience. And the cinema became the major art form we know. So we shouldn't be afraid of technology, but grabbing everything we can. And today, all the new mode of expressions emerging from new technology linked to the online and the internet should be really taken on board to help. Reinforcing our situation. And if I may, I would like quickly to talk about our position and our situation regarding internet and regarding the giants of the internet. The only people who have made a fortune on the back of the virus are the big actors of the internet. At the same time, they made lots of money by distributing our content created by artists and authors who are not able to survive anymore. So there is a kind of total unbalanced situation we have to readjust. And I think that it's time also to sit around a table after this pandemic with the internet, the different platforms, because we need to share the digital cake in a more balanced part. And I'm talking especially for also emerging countries. But if we don't do this, it's just an old part of our civilization worldwide is going to disappear. We need to tell that, as I say sometimes, that in a smartphone, the smart part is us. Artists, authors, creators, and we need to also to ourselves, not only to the platforms. Accept that when you are buying a newspaper in the street, why you don't want to accept to get the same price, to buy for the same price on the internet the same content just because it's online. The same for a movie, the same for an album, the same for a photography. We should ourselves, as part of the civil society, get used to accept that the value of any kind of mode of expressions when it's online has exactly the same value as when it is in the real world, because that would save lots of our problems. Because at the moment, we as citizens of the world have the tendency that culture should be free as the air we breathe. And if we don't do this, as somebody said just before, without culture, this period would have been a total despair and a desert. And it will be even worse after the pandemic if we don't, and if the big actors of the internet are not accepting this. And I think it's time now. You know, as you know, I've been president of CISAC for 6 years, and I went all over the world discussing with politicians and people of the media and people of the internet. And you know, things are changing because of the pandemic. People are much more ready to listen to us and to listen to the cultural world than before, because they've been hit in their own blood, in their own flesh during the lockdown period. And I think this is a very good opportunity for us to change paradigm and to also make these giants and these big actors of the internet accepting something that I think they are ready to accept now. We can see that people such as Netflix now, for instance, are now ready to produce movies. Unfortunately, to answer to your question directly about the music sector, you know, YouTube, for instance, is progressing, is much less the Darth Vader of the sector than before. But when you see Spotify proposing to artists to get less money to increase their exposure on the platform, when you see Spotify saying to people, please don't give some money to artists you love, or in some countries even organizing telethons. I would like to remind everybody that music and culture is not a disease, and it's something what need to be respected. And if we have a request to the government, is to send this clear message that, you know, artists, authors are doctors of our souls, and we need an urgent vaccine against all these abuses.
Jean Michel Jarre, comme vous le rappeliez, les nouvelles technologies.
As you pointed out, Jean Michel Jarre, there are many opportunities associated with the new technologies. What's at stake is creating a system that is fair, a level playing field for all actors. That's what's at stake. Thomas Steffens, the public at large doesn't really know how musical streaming platforms function. Could you give us an idea of what your business model is? How do you generate income? And do you think that your type of platform can contribute to the economic recovery, and how?
How most streaming services work is pretty much that 50%, so half of the revenue, is paid out to rights holders, typically being, in our case, record labels, who then at their turn pay out a part to the artists. But I agree with what has been said, is that there is too many unfair practices in the way how royalties are distributed, and in the end up with artists, because we are facing a world with, let's say, you can't leave this to the market, because there is, let's say, an imbalance of power in the market. There's a few big distribution players, there's a few very large content owners, and then there is thousands or maybe even millions of artists, and there is an inherent imbalance of power in the market, which is why the governments can't leave it up to the markets like they currently have. And I would also like to add to what Abderrahmane and Victoria and Vanja have said. Indeed, only stronger governments can help the cultural sector to contribute to society what it can. But to do that, I think we need to speak a language, we need to speak as a cultural sector more the language of the skeptics, of the people who are not naturally convinced on the value that culture can bring to society. And I think that's also where UNESCO can play a role, because we're now really moving deep into the 21st century. And people often talk about the 21st century skills. If you look at mankind, has increasingly to compete with computer and technology. But there is stuff that technology can never do. When you think about lateral thinking, about creativity, about making connections, about aesthetics. So I think the value of the art is only increasing in light of, let's say, the increasing technology of society. I think we're also facing a societal challenge where we see that as we can, for instance, see in American, but also European politics, that there is more movement on the extremes of the political spectrum. Societies are increasingly divided. So what we need is our next generation to be better listeners, to better listen to other people's perspective. And if you look at a painting, you're being forced to think, what is this painter trying to say? Which message is he trying to convey? If you are looking to a play, you're being forced for an hour and a half to listen to somebody else and not giving your own view. So I believe the arts can contribute a lot to the challenges of the 21st century, but we need to create a narrative that explains how the cultural sector can do that, so that we can convince the skeptics. Because if we continue speaking our own language, we are praying to the converted rather than praying to those who still need to be converted.
Merci Thomas Steffens. Un point qui est effectivement très intéressant.
That is a very interesting point of view. Thank you, Thomas. Before we go on to the next part of the debate, I would like to show you a video sent by the city of Medellín. J'ai souvent vu.
Llenaban de espectadores, de música, de concierto, de energía. El contacto de la gente y la vibración hacían que Medellín, como ciudad creativa, viviera y explorara la música como uno de sus espacios mágicos y sensibles. En el 2020 nos enfrentamos a un reto. Una pandemia hizo que se cerraran todos los escenarios e incluso los eventos en el espacio público se vieron reducidos. Como ciudad de la UNESCO de la música creativa, nosotros construimos desde Medellín la posibilidad de darle a los artistas y a la ciudad un espacio de encuentro, de esparcimiento. Nuestras primeras acciones se encaminaron y se enfocaron en escenarios móviles que recorrieron la ciudad y los barrios donde nunca habíamos llegado. Cada uno de los eventos que la ciudad había construido los transformamos en una transformación digital y también en un encuentro ciudadano a través de recorrer en carros y en caravanas móviles una ciudad que vibró en medio de la pandemia con el arte y la música. Nuestra ciudad, Medellín, logró en el 2020 continuar con esa energía y esa vitalidad del arte de otra manera. Nuestros eventos como Altavoz, Feria de Flores, los eventos del libro, las redes de prácticas artísticas, la red de música, la red audiovisual, llenaron cada uno de los espacios cotidianos. Hicimos música desde los balcones, desde las casas, y esto permitió que Medellín siguiera vibrando y viviendo con la música y el arte. Para nosotros, la música, el arte y la creación son esa fuerza y esa energía que en medio de la pandemia le dio la posibilidad a la ciudad de seguir adelante y a los artistas de seguir viviendo a través de muchos estímulos la posibilidad de crear y sobre todo de reinventarse en medio de los momentos más difíciles.
Voilà pour ce message de la ville.
Thank you. That was the message from the city of Medellín, which started taking measures to support its artists. We have been told that we can carry on discussing until 5:30, and we have a lot left to say. As you just mentioned, we have been told a lot by the crisis, particularly about how to best use the digital technologies. The new technologies mean a lot of opportunities, but they also mean new difficulties and possibly threats. Abderrahmane Sissako, I'm going to give you our first question. What do you see is the impact of the digital tools? How does it impact your work? How does it impact your work as an artist, but also in the way you work? How does it affect the way you distribute and disseminate your works? And what measures do we need to make sure that the success of such platforms as Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus do not damage the quality of contents and the diversity of cultural expressions in films and series? Well, I think that Jean Michel is right. There's no need to be. Can you hear me now? Yes, this time we hear you very well. Thank you. I think that there's no point in being scared of new technologies. We have reflexes, negative reflexes. Of course, you can choose to be afraid, but fear is not a tool for progress. Some of these technologies are amazing. I'm communicating with you through Wi-Fi right now. It's working. Now, it's important to remember, as a friend was telling me recently, in Africa, we believe in oral culture, and that is a fine thing. But with new technologies, you can't speak for free. You have to pay. Internet costs, and not everybody can afford it. So people are dispossessed, and sometimes you wind up spending more on new technologies than on health or education. So I always think it's important to remember that there needs to be a reminder that everybody should be able to share in and share out the wonderful things associated with new technologies. It isn't currently the case. When it comes to creativity, I don't think that Netflix gets in the way of anything. You know, humans will always find inspiration, and there'll always be a huge quantity of works, and everybody's going to have to make their own choice. The tool for distributing creations is increasingly accessible, and as the tool is more accessible, well, culture becomes more accessible. It becomes more democratic in a way. So there's nothing to be afraid of there. Something's missing, though, in our countries. One thing that's missing is political awareness in our governments, political awareness of the need to protect creators. And they're not aware of that need. You know of authors' rights and copyrights. There are practically no countries in Africa that actually make sure that some of the money that is earned by their works goes back to the musicians themselves. We just don't have these laws. It's really a problem. And it's only when reminded by the pandemic that we realize that we are all vulnerable. There is no such evil, no evil that will not damage me as well. Anything that harms anyone or any place is potentially a danger to me as well. And that's what the pandemic must keep us aware of. Anything that is unfair, anything that is missing in terms of education, for example, in one country, in one place, is not just the problem of that one country, of that one place, of Africa, for example. It's a problem for everybody. Because sooner or later, it will affect everyone through violence, for example. And so new technologies are an opportunity for all of us, but there is something missing. What's missing is the sharing, as Jean Michel was saying. Those who have gained the most from the pandemic are multinationals, big companies, and they've made a lot of gains that will not be shared. Now, I hope, I wish that the pandemic brings about a change. If that change is going to happen, we have to change. Each person has to decide to be different after the pandemic. A pandemic which is in fact going to change a lot of things.
En termes de législation concernant le secteur culturel, par exemple, pour les questions.
Now, the pandemic is going to change a lot of things, in particular in the cultural sector. Now, the big Apple, Amazon, Google, etc., are lobbying in Brussels to ensure that the new restrictions will not have a negative effect on their income. How can we ensure that artists get fair remuneration for their work? Well, thank you very much for answering that, because I think it's important to put that question to the European Commission. Europe has a very important role to play for the rest of the world. Europe has always been synonymous with respect for authors' rights and for culture compared to other continents. So any future measures or current measures that are taken by the European Union will have a domino effect in other areas of the world, such as Africa, as Abderrahmane Sissako was saying, but other places as well. So we have done a lot these past few years, and I've really been intensifying these efforts recently. You know, I mentioned earlier that what we need is a vaccine. Well, you know, it already exists. It's called regulation. That's, you know, what differentiates democracy from chaos. The line is regulation, and regulations are not restrictions on freedom. They mean more freedom. They protect your freedom. Now, the big platforms have been kind of losing their almighty strength over the past few years. And they understand that if they do not accept regulations, they've been saying that regulations would give them less freedom. It's a bit like saying if you are free to go on the highway at any speed you want, it's restrictive of that speed limits are restrictive of your freedom. But what we need is regulation simply to rebalance things. You have some operators that make huge sums of money off of those that produce the content, and therefore we need to find a proper balance. So I think that Netflix is not too bad an example. Let's not forget that the difference between a movie platform like Netflix and a music streaming service is the fact that they reinvest their money. They take that money and they put it back in creation, but the redistribution is not clear. Like if you pay a monthly plan from one of those platforms, if during the month you have not listened to any music, where does that money go? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it's one example amongst others that shows that there's lack of clarity and that we need to rebalance things, make things fairer. Something else about the big GAFA in music. We realized during the pandemic that you had a lot of musicians that shared their art for free, streaming from home. Very generously they did so. Well, you know, we as audiences, we should not consider that this is normal. This would throw us back 2 centuries and reduce artists to beggars on the streets, begging for money whenever they play, like buskers. So these big platforms do have to be a platform for expression, but we need to be able to monetize our own creation. That's one way of reacting positively in the face of platforms. No, you know that the internet is something very young, 20, 25 years old. It's like the Wild West. And the GAFAs are indeed have set up shop in the West. It's no coincidence. Thank you very much, Jean Michel Jarre. Abderrahmane, did you want to say something? Well, I wanted to say that Europe does provide us with hope, and Europe does have to be in the front line of that fight. We don't have that strength in Africa. We have we are united, but we don't have the strength. So Europe is a bulwark. We've seen the very negative effect of the US pulling out of UNESCO. We see the very negative effects this sort of thing can have. So we need to stand united. We need to get together to be stronger. And Abderrahmane, one voice out of Africa is worth 10 voices from the US or Europe. We absolutely need the African continent to get our rights as artists respected in those countries. In those countries where it's difficult to express yourself, that's where you need that unity even more than anywhere else. That's why UNESCO as an organization is so important. Also why the European Union is an important voice. There's a directive that was voted at the European Union for the respect of artistic and intellectual property. That is something that made us stronger with respect to YouTube, and it is by creating even closer bonds between artists that we are going to be able to stand stronger and come out stronger out of this climate of insecurity. It's been our fault until now. we're in a kind of pandemic tunnel, and I hope that this is going to be an opportunity for us to stand closer together and come out stronger. Thank you very much. Now, Thomas Steffens, you head up a streaming platform.
Given that musicians and singers are currently in most countries unable to give concerts, and the only way for them to get an income is often thanks to royalties, have you ensured that the artists you have on your platform receive a fair payment? Have you changed your business model due to the pandemic? Did you take any specific measures to increase your artists' income? And maybe one quick final question: what do you think about the idea of creating a minimum per play compensation for artists?
I think a minimum will help to stop a race to the bottom that we currently see. And let me maybe give you one example on, let's say, how royalty allocation can create wrong incentives. The way that the YouTubes and Spotifys of this world allocate their royalties, they just count how often an artist has been streamed. But it doesn't matter if you have been streamed for 1 minute or for 10 minutes, you get the same 0.1 cent per stream. But, you know, for instance, jazz and classical and blues songs tend to be much longer than pop songs. All pop songs are typically around 3 minutes. But in jazz and blues and classical, one song or track or whatever you want to call it can be 10 to 20 minutes, which means that a pop artist gets per hour, maybe he gets streamed 20 times by a user. Whereas this classical work maybe only gets streamed 6 times, 10 minutes. So then in the end, the pop artist gets 3 times as much per hour than the classical or the blues or the jazz artist. You can solve it by not paying out based on how often an artist is being listened to, but how long. Then you need to keep track of how long people are listening to music. That means more data consumption, it's more complexity. And then Spotify says, yeah, that's more work for us. We're not going to do it. It's the right thing to do. It's more work. We do it. We as a small organization do it. But the big guys, whether it's Spotify or Deezer or YouTube, they refuse to do it because it's extra complexity for them. And the music let's say the artists don't have the power to force them to change their practices. But I think in the end, governments can, and I have high hopes that the European Commission will act. I think, as we have seen typically, that the American government is too business-minded to challenge them. In Europe, it takes long, but eventually, I think the European Commission has, let's say, taken up the gloves to combat the big guys, because that's the only party they will likely listen to.
Voilà des pistes, en tout cas l'une des pistes qui semble émerger.
That's definitely an interesting avenue. Could I please add something, says Jean Michel Jarre. Yes, just to pick up on what Thomas said, that's an excellent example. It does show how crucial it is for us to regulate platforms differently in a novel way. Now, everybody's saying about music, well, the pandemic was awful because people can't go out and play. Let's not forget that many musicians, and it's not their job, are not trained to play music on a stage. They're authors, they are composers, they are not performers. There's that whole part of the music industry that's that they're not even getting mentioned on the platforms. You know, the composers and authors of the lyrics are not even mentioned on platforms. There was a recent example in Britain of a pop song author, a woman, that wrote songs for Kylie Minogue's last album. It streamed in all countries. You know how much she got paid in all? All in all, £100. A leading author of lyrics. Imagine a non-popular author or someone, a composer in pop music, or not in pop music. Those that do classical music, etc., they get 0 cents from the music platforms. That's what we need to rebalance. And I don't think it's intentional on behalf of on the part of platforms is just that they grew so quickly that now we need that rebalancing, readjustment. I'm sorry for having butted in. No problem, not at all. That's a very interesting point of view. I'd just like to move on to the next question for Vanja, because it's already 5:12 in Paris, and we don't have time to cover all the topics. Vanja Kaludjercic, just to continue on these new challenges in the digital age.
The cinema industry to ensure that the digital revolution is an opportunity and not a threat. As mentioned at the beginning of this debate, you are organizing currently your festival online. Have you already identified certain measures that should be implemented specifically to adjust to the challenges posed by the new technologies?
Well, first, I think it's good. I think it goes without saying that for us, indeed, the ability to develop a digital solution has offered an opportunity this year. Less than 10 years ago, we simply could not have put on an international festival in these circumstances. So for us, the key will be to build upon what we've developed for use in future editions. For that reason, I think a lot of knowledge sharing will have to take place, and over time, we'll be able to figure out what works and what doesn't to best serve the industry and audiences together in this new paradigm, as we referred to it quite a few times. But also speaking of the opportunities, I think in the matter of a few months, we've gone from being an event hosting hundreds of thousands of people physically in our city to now truly exporting our brand virtually back across the globe. And moving forward for our local partners, it's going to mean having a lot of thoughtful conversations with each of them about who they want to reach and how we can work together to best serve their needs and their expectations. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanja. Victoria Contreras, can digital platforms and the internet be a useful tool to help the cultural world recover, or do they represent a threat to you? And again, what measures should be taken to regulate this sector? Victoria, your microphone is off. Sorry.
Sorry again. Well, yes, digital tools are very useful in our work, in the work of many of the cultural managers, etc. And I strongly believe that internet access should be a human right in this moment, particularly for population with less access. There are examples of very understanding, no commercial internet, such as the case of Wi-Fi Net in Catalonia, which is free, neutral, self-managed, collaborative, and low cost. That kind of internet most exists more in the world, especially in regions like mine, where the gap between digital access is huge.
Thank you, Victoria. And while we were getting ready for this debate, lorsque on a préparé ce débat,
when we were preparing for this debate, and I'll speak French first and then speak English because I forgot that we have interpreters. So at the beginning, when we were preparing this, Victoria, you talked about gender inequalities in the creative sectors, just like in other areas. What are your recommendations to reduce those inequalities?
You asked me in English, please.
I'll ask in English as well. I wasn't sure if the translation was working. So I was saying, as we exchanged the emails to get to prepare this debate, you told me that the issue you wanted to talk about was the gender inequalities. So what do you think should be done to reduce those inequalities?
Well, first of all, we must recognize women and girls as agents of change within their communities and value their achievements. I think UNESCO has a report, a pretty important report about the issue of gender. In the case of my country, I mentioned you, gaps are huge, still huge. In the case, for example, of my personal history in cultural management, well, I have to say that it is not easy to work as an entrepreneur, cultural entrepreneur in my country. Even the challenges, we try to inspire more girls and women to try to work in the cultural sector. Why? Because when people feel more empowerment in their own sector, we can make active change in our countries. And not only that, we can make much more benefits for our society. And the vision of girls and women have to be included in the debate. For that, I really appreciate that UNESCO with ResiliArt include women's and women's for Latin America, that is my case, and Mexico, because I say the challenges are huge, but we are not, we have a really commitment to improve the quality of the cultural services in our country and ensure that women and men equally enjoy the right of the same access. I know in other sectors, the problems are the same, but I think cultural and artists can give to the society a very good pedagogy to understand that this is so important in our democratic and cultural lives.
Gracias, Victoria. Vanja, your role model, you're an example of a woman who succeeded in the cinema industry, and you work on a daily basis with other women in the industry. What is your opinion on gender inequality? How can it be reduced? What needs to be changed?
World Economic Forum provided us with a very sobering finding of the global gender gap that was published in 2019. And it reveals that gender parity will not be obtained for another 99.5 years. And that was before the pandemic hit. So I can only imagine what it's going to be for 2020. And that was, so you're right. The gender parity is of essential importance for our sector. And I don't think nobody needs me to tell them that inequality exists in our industry. And we also know that there's a range of persuasive inequalities we encounter and participate in on a daily basis. So none of us will see gender parity in our lifetimes, and nor likely for many, it will not be the case for many of our children. However, I think it's important to address diversity on a broader scale than gender only. Think, for example, of ethnicity, social background, and so on. It is also what we stand for as a festival. Only by including a greater plurality of voices can we ultimately achieve better representation and equality. IFFR started 50 years ago as the voice of filmmakers who could not be heard anywhere else. And we should be very self-reflective about who we hire and who we put in positions to contribute rigorously to the conversations we are having. I need to be ensuring that there is an equal and diverse dispersation of ideas represented in our selection committees as well. And this is critical and maybe seems a bit obvious, but still we need to always be taking a step back and looking where we need to be doing better.
Et on va aussi poser la question aux gentlemen.
Well, we can also ask the same question to the gentlemen who are with us. You're going to have to go quickly. We only have 10 minutes left. We still have a conclusion that we want to share with the main messages. So, gentlemen, what is your vision?
Question. Thomas, are you with us? I think your microphone is off, so I was asking your opinion about this issue.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I think in the classical music world is a bad example in the sense that if you look at, for 300 years, nearly all composers we know today are men. If you still look at, let's say, the biggest orchestras in the world, nearly all the conductors are men. But if you look, for instance, at the orchestras themselves, they are nearly 50-50. So we really see a clear desire in industry to get to balance. But the honest answer is also it's taking 10-20 years, I think, before the classical music industry will be there. If I look at my own company, what we ensure, let's say, by measuring it, equal pay between men and women in the same departments. But that having said, between departments, there are differences. And let me give an example. We have a large, let's say, team of software developers whose salaries are relatively higher because there is a big shortage in the labor market on software developers. And unfortunately, most software developers are men. So I think one of the causes also divide in the coming decades is that women tend to be underrepresented in, let's say, the expertises where there is most scarcity. So I would really also, I think we discussed today a lot that a part of the future of the arts is in technology, but then we also have to make sure that women will be equally part of, let's say, the technological side to make sure that even when we get to same pay for the same job, we may still not end up with gender pay equality if women continue to be underrepresented in the more scarce, let's say, expertises. So I hope that...
Okay, so a better representation of the women that needs to start there. Abderrahmane Sissako?
And you, Abderrahmane Sissako. Well, I tend to be rather optimistic about these issues. If you look at the last 20 years, just look at France, which is the country I know best, the question of gender has progressed enormously. There's a lot more producers who are women, a lot more distributors who are women, so things are changing. I think that there's been a true change in mentalities. And even in Africa, there's more and more women making films, working with documentaries, directing. So you can see the change in mentalities. Of course, there's pressure from the political leadership, and there's a fight going on at the local level. But I think it's fair to say that things are changing. Jean Michel Jarre, in 1977, you wrote a song called "Where Are the Women? Où sont les femmes?" Well, what shall we do about women? I think that there's less reason to ask that question because the women are there. As Abderrahmane was saying, they are increasingly present right there with us. And in the field of music, we may have been among the first to really give that change a green light. In my personal case, I think that I work with a majority of women. For 30 years now, I've been working with a majority of women. So if I was going to have equal representation, it would have to be more men. But I think that there's two aspects to take into consideration. You want to look at who is working, and you want to look at what you do. Let me give an example. Recently, I gave a concert in Saudi Arabia because I think it's important to actually go to those places where they don't have the same liberties. I'm absolutely against boycotting those places. That's your privilege as an artist to go there. And for example, I was able to demand that my concert was held outside and that women should be let in the same as men. Now, that's the sort of gesture that we artists need to make in order to push society in the right direction. That particularly applies in those countries where the balance is not present or is more fragile than here. It is true that that artists have that power to change mentalities. We've seen that throughout history. Now, we have very little time left. I'm going to ask you all a question. Can you summarize briefly which is the message you want your audience and the decision makers at the top planetary level to support culture and creative industries? I'm going to start with giving Victoria the floor. Merci.
My central message is that culture, again, is part of the global solution, and we have to encourage a radical change in public action and decision making of the direction of culture in a global way. The arts and creativity. We need the enlightened, the collaborative leadership of decision makers so that the cultural is considered strategic, productive, regenerative, innovative, and part of the solution in the pandemic and post-pandemic. This requires an unprecedented economic and social investment in co-responsibility with governments, companies, civil societies, and individuals. Well, we have to be much more explicit in the contribution of culture and the arts in the recovery of cities and populations. And finally, I want to add a comment with a Chilean colleague and her partner, that is Fabiola Leiva and Pablo Diaz. Make visible the understanding of the role of culture in life, economic and social, in sustainable life, in communities. In this sense, it will be relevant to design, implement and model strategies and tools for sustainable territorial development based on a cultural and creative economy perspective from a territorial approach. Finally, my colleague also, Carlos Lara, said that UNESCO should we work together with the G20 and the World Health Organization for the recovery of people and territories. Cici Montilla, a Venezuelan colleague, say new fiscal mechanism and laws to promote the patronage and finance it not only for people, but for groups and cultural entrepreneurs. And finally, promote new forms of economy for the diversity of societies. Culture should also be thought from collective and solidarity economies. That's it.
Thomas Stevens?
Yes, for me, I think, in the end, I think what we also learned today is to really advance the arts, we need more support from governments. To get support from governments, we need to convince majorities among voters and in society. And I think what I learned from today especially is we need to create a narrative that does not only speak to people who love culture already, but we need to create a narrative that also speaks to the skeptic people. And I deeply believe that culture can make a major contribution to the challenges of the 21st century, on the 21st century skills, etc. And we need to create a narrative that also, let's say, reaches out and convinces the skeptic ones. And I hope that UNESCO can play a role in creating that narrative.
And UNESCO is listening. I'm sure they'll do their best. They are leading this fight. Vanja Kaludjercic.
What we saw from the last financial crisis, the devastating and obvious impact of cuts to our creative and cultural sector. And perhaps what's underappreciated, however, is the harm that has been done to public discourse and to the health of our democracies as a consequence. If we as a global community value our abilities to monitor and defend human rights, we need to place an appropriate emphasis on that as a collective cultural project. We all understand the long-term difficult consequences of this pandemic that are ahead of us, but I would hope that the difficult conversation that will be needed starts now, are treated proactively and with seriousness and with the honest public engagement that is deserved. Culture cannot be an afterthought within a well-functioning and just democracy. It can only be fundamental to it.
Abderrahmane Sissako.
I would like this post-pandemic period not to start with Europe closing down upon itself and closing down its borders from fear of health issues, and that should close the paths for artists all over the world. Europe has a tendency to close down upon itself. It fears migrants, it fears terror, and this time I think that they might also fear viruses, and that this is going to lead it to close down all of its borders for so many people who already find it so difficult to cross the oceans and the borders, and that is particularly true of our artists. That is an important message indeed. Abderrahmane, thank you. Jean Michel Jarre, would you like to conclude? I'd be glad to. I would like to send a message, a strong message, to all governments, but also to all people. I want them, and I want us, to hear this message. Music and culture deserve respect. we have to respect it, we have to pay for it, we should have to pay fairly for it, and we must never forget that culture is one of the pillars of human rights. Thank you so much, Jean Michel Jarre, and thank you all for having participated in this very rich and productive discussion. These are the cultural professionals who remind you that there can be no economy without the creative industries. Ernesto Ottone had to leave us because he's fighting our fight elsewhere. He heard everything that was said. UNESCO has heard everything that was said, and it's going to pass it on to the decision makers. Thank all of the members of our audience for following the discussions. Thank you all, and wishing you a very pleasant rest of the day. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Merci. Merci à tous. C'était un plaisir.
Ciao.
Merci encore. Au revoir.
Thank you all, and goodbye.